changes will be discussed together. So section 1 of the proposed rules is an amendment to section 2-11, which deals with mechanical equipment and HVAC equipment. And the idea here was to allow for split systems for air conditioning, which is now becoming much more common, and we're seeing it in a lot of different areas. So we wanted to make sure that section 211, which is really about through the wall, through the window units, can accommodate that. So the two critical findings are that a wall-mounted HVAC unit, the split-level unit, split system unit, shall not be visible from a public thoroughfare, and the conduit from such a unit may be visible, but shall be painted to match the underlying material. And so one question that's come up is, should we not require, should we require there to be no conduit on visible facade? And that's something I think we can all consider, and maybe it will come up in testimony as well. Section 2 of the proposed rules, an amendment to 2-15, which deals with window openings and new window openings. And Sarah's going to talk about that in connection with the proposal in section 8, which is an amendment to section 304, which is deals with new sash and frames in new and modified window openings.
Okay, Commissioner. So as you know, there are two rules that the Commission has adopted that relate to new window openings or relate to changing or creating new window openings. And those rules were written at two different times, sort of with two different focuses behind them. And so there's language in the two of the rules that are not consistent with each other. And so, for example, the new window opening rule allows staff to approve new masonry openings on visible facades. But the rule that allows alterations to masonry openings does not allow the staff to alter visible masonry openings, even if the visible masonry openings are meeting the same criteria that are applied to new window openings. And so we think that if you can do one, you should be able to do the other as long as they follow the same criteria. The other inconsistency is that the new window rule has the existing window rule has specific criteria for the configuration of visible windows. So that it says that the configuration of the visible window needs to match the historic configuration. The rule for creating new window openings talks about retaining a general shape and pattern, but is very vague about what the configuration of the window should be. So we think, again, that they should be consistent. And so we would be amending the new window opening rule, 215, to allow or to require that the sash match the historic configuration on that facade, and if there is no historic configuration on that facade, that it match the front facade. Also, we looked at both rules and thought about how they could be modified to better reflect the Commission's comments. So one example of that is for the rule that allows the staff to modify existing non-visible window openings. It allows the staff to do it on every floor, and because you all have taken the position that the top floor of the rear facade of row houses is a significant feature in and of itself, we are proposing an amendment to the window rule that would not allow the staff to modify window openings on the top floor of a non-visible rear facade of a row house. And for section 2... Non-visible or visible? Non-visible. So right now, if it's a non-visible window opening, the rule says that you can modify it. So we're actually peeling that back and saying that because the Commission has felt strongly that the top floor should be retained, that staff will no longer be allowed to do that. And section 215, which is the new window opening rule on side facades, and these are sometimes lot line facades, sometimes they're just side facades depending on the massing of the building. Again, it's pretty vague in its intent. It talks about retaining the same general shape and pattern, and that no significant features be damaged. And we had an application in the last year for a new window openings on a row house in Cobble Hill, and the proposal met our current rules, and we heard from the community some objections about the amount of windows that were allowed, and the rule doesn't limit the number of window openings. So we're actually thinking that the intent of this rule really is to maintain a secondary nature on these secondary facades. So we are proposing modifications to the criteria that would better reflect this intent, and that is that the facade maintain a secondary appearance and that there be a solid to void ratio that is more consistent with historic lot line for secondary facades.
More solid than void.
On that, so
that percentage would be included, or
there's no percentage. It's the thing.
just as it still would be
Right. The idea being that
determination, right?
right. I mean, the objection to the application in Cobble Hill was the feeling that it was a side facade that was next to like a corner village, so it was going to be visible, you know, and people felt like it was turning it into more of a primary facade. There's a sense that that was inappropriate, and we wanted to make so. Again, the sense of the staff here is that one of the defining characteristics of these secondary facades is that they generally are these utilitarian masonry facades with punched openings, that kind of thing, and that's what this is designed to sort of keep, this idea that it's primarily there's a high solid to void ratio, so that we have the inherent ability without quantifying, because I don't know how you would quantify it in a particular way, but it allows the staff to say this is too transparent, or too many windows.
you could quantify it by saying that there just has to be fewer than on the principal facade.
In fact, you open a big door, if your front facade is 60% windows, that could give you a lot of leeway.
Right, so the application that sort of caused us to think about this language was for a row house, but the rule actually is applicable for all building types. So big commercial buildings are also eligible for new window openings at staff level.
So, you know, if you do put a percentage on, I'm not sure what that percentage might be, you know, 80, 20, 70, 30, whatever it is, you know, the way to actually try to determine what would be correct is just take a couple of examples and see and draw it up and see whether that actually would fit the you know, because
Right.
more versus, you know, more solid versus less solid. I think it's really open.
Okay, but here's, I think this is the public hearing process. So what we're going to do is, these are all really good questions. So well, I think so we'll have testimony, then we'll have a discussion. And the way the process works is that we can have discussion, but you all, to the extent that you've had the rules, if you want to also send me an email or Sarah an email saying, well, we think you should look at this or that, that also, you know, under CAPA, that's a comment, you know, so we would consider that as well. And the process, the chair reminded me, I should just sort of briefly remind you of what we're doing. The rules, you know, 95% of what we do here at the Commission on a regulatory basis happens pursuant to these rules. And these rules tell applicants if you can meet these rules, you're entitled to a permit. And the rules get modified over time as the commissions, as we sort of experience new technologies, new situations, philosophies change or altered. And so the rules really reflect current practices and are meant
so that if we have a series of one after another, and they're consistent results in a fact pattern that fits those results without too much leeway, then they can be codified. And it's modest and it's incremental, and some of them, as Sarah's already alluded, are giving less discretion, if you will, to staff, and others are more. So it's a mix, and it's a way to sort of catch up on our practices. It helps to the extent it removes from the Commission's agenda, or the crowded agenda already, items that are clearly of that nature, that they have been so consistently decided, and that's good. And to the extent that it reflects, as in the Cobble Hill situation, an evolving standard, or the top windows on the top floor, then that goes back to us. So who knows what it'll be after it's all said and done, whether there'll be more hearings or fewer hearings, but ultimately we want to keep in mind that we are here to carry out the preservation law and to make it as simple as possible and transparent as possible for homeowners, property owners, advocates, users, you name it, a whole range of interests out here. So this is the nature, I think, of, if it works well, which it is working well, and as we go through this process, of tightening things up, streamlining, if you will, in some cases, and providing a better form of good government, in my opinion.
Right.
So that's the broad
Right,
context.
so the process will be, we have this hearing, to the extent you all give us comments, again, you can give us 2 cents comment, by email or whatever, or there'll be discussion at some future point, and then we'll see where, if there's consensus on whether the rules, are okay, what changes should be made, and there'll be discussion about what those changes are, in terms of standards, or some of the things you may decide you don't agree with, or you do agree with, and we'll work those through. So the cabinet process is a very, sort of iterative process. There's lots of, it's just been out there in the community for a while now, and there'll be another meeting, at least a public meeting, and maybe a public hearing on future changes as well. Okay, so that's the window. So the next one is the proposed changes to section 216, which is the rear yard rule. And this is another example where these changes are reflecting the changes that the commission has sort of implemented over the last 5 or 6 years, largely as a result of members of the community bringing this issue up over and over again. How much of the rear yard, how big should these things be, what should you be looking at? And the commission's responded, and this is meant to sort of codify how we have looked at those applications. So first of all, the proposed change gives specific examples of architectural features on the rear of buildings that have been determined to be significant. The old rule didn't only identify 1 or 2. This is expanding that definition. So everyone knows, oh yes, this is something that we have considered a significant feature, so therefore you wouldn't be entitled to get staff level permit. In addition, it requires that a majority of the other buildings in the block have rear yard additions that encroach into the rear green space to a similar or greater degree. It requires that the height of the proposed addition is no taller than the predominant height of existing additions or enlargements. So both as vertical as well as horizontal sort of limit on how we're looking at these things. So again, if there's all the additions in the block, the majority of them are 2-story, that's all the staff's going to be allowed to do. Right now, we do 3-story. But if the majority of them in the block are 2-story, that's what we're going to be limited to at staff level. Okay? It would permit an addition to be minimally visible. We haven't defined that term because they're sort of self-defined. Usually you get the tops of this or the side of this, but that's one question that people have raised in the past and something that you all should think about whether we want to define. It is defined in the rooftop addition rule. I think one of the issues, the reason I chose not to define it in this rule is because unlike rooftop additions, which can be seen in the context of the sky, so they really stick out, rear yard additions are almost always seen in the context of rear facades and other rear yard things. So their impact, I think, is far, far less in terms of what it might be. So that's a question, an open question on the table. And finally, and this is a change that is reflected in this rule as well as the rooftop addition rule, because the commission has started to sort of look at the overall amount of change that can happen on a building. We have proposed that there be a further limit on what the staff can do, and that is on a rear yard or rooftop addition. And that is if there is an existing rooftop addition, grandfathered or commission approved, that's existing, or if there's an approval by the commission for a rooftop addition, the staff will not be permitted to approve any rear yard addition on the theory that perhaps that's for the commission to decide what the overall amount of the addition of the rear should be given there's a rooftop addition already. And that change, that idea, is, you'll see in a minute, is reflected in the rooftop addition as well. So right now, staff can approve rooftop and rear yard additions on a building as long as they're not visible and they meet the other criteria. Section 4 of the proposed rules deals with temporary permits. And we are proposing 2 additional renewal periods for temporary permits for construction-related structures and installations on publicly owned property like City Hall Park. The construction-related issue came up when for instance, there needs to be a stair tower, an exit, and some sort of egress thing built while they're putting an addition on the building. And it's been very difficult to approve those under the temporary rules. We've done it technically as a CNE in the past, but I think it's better done as a temporary permit. That's why this is intended to get to those construction-related installations. Because right now it's limited to 1 year. Okay. For construction-related installations, there's also a requirement for the plan for the removal, storage, and reinstallation of any significant feature and elements that need to be removed or in the context of that temporary installation. Section 5, rooftop addition. So again, this is also trying to reflect current conditions of the commission and the kind of way we do things now. So in addition, we have to be limited to 1 story. Its height would be no more than 11 feet from the top of the roof line to the top of the roof of the addition, and would have to be set back from the rear facade by at least 3 feet. In addition, and similarly to the proposed amendments to the rear yard addition, no rooftop addition would be permitted by staff if there was already a rear yard addition. The grandfather, commission approved, and built, or commission approved and unbuilt. And finally, we are defining mechanical equipment to include alternative energy technologies such as solar panels, wind turbines, and micro turbines. This would mean that these things could be approved if they were minimally visible. Again, under the rooftop addition rules, mechanical equipment can be approved if it's minimally visible, which is 12 inches, and or otherwise doesn't detract from the building, significance of the building or other buildings in the district. And so one question that I think is on the table is should the staff be permitted to approve minimally visible rooftop additions of occupiable space? And again, could it be the 12 inches? Could it use the same definition of minimally visible, or should we change that definition? And I think, again, the commission routinely approves minimally visible rooftop additions, not every time, but very often. They kind of seen in the context of other buildings, it's not seen up against the sky or seen from such a distance that views seem not to track. So that's a question that sort of we all need to consider, you all need to consider in particular. Okay, the next section, section 6, deals with signage. This is a big change from what's existing now. We do a lot of signage at staff level. Sarah's going to walk you through this. It is also an expansion of the bracket sign rule that we've been talking about for some time.
Okay, so, and just to follow up on the rules that Mark was just describing for rear yard additions and rooftop additions, just in case it wasn't clear, the language in these rules, with the exception of the question of whether or not the staff can approve minimally visible rear yard and rooftop additions, all of the other criteria that we're proposing to add peels back the staff's authority or makes it much more specific about what the staff can approve. So right now, the rules are much more flexible and allow the staff to approve a lot more. So these changes actually are kind of tightening that up and peeling it back, again, with the exception of those suggestions of some minimal visibility. And then for signage, the staff, as you know, we have the bracket sign rule for the 4 or 5 industrial districts, the M districts, manufacturing districts. And we've been talking a lot about extending the bracket sign rule to allow bracket signs at storefronts throughout the city. And when we sat down to work on that, we thought, well, there are a lot of other types of signage that we already do at staff level. And to be transparent and clear and helpful to property owners and other people who look at the rules, we should actually codify all of the signs that we do at staff level. And so that's what this rule is about. What it does is it codifies what we already do at staff level. It expands the bracket sign rule to allow it throughout the city. And for the signs that we already do at staff level, the way that that's determined is that if the signs do not cause damage to any significant features, and if they're based on a historic type of signage or location of signage, the staff can then approve it. Or if it has simply no effect, the staff can approve it. So the types of signs that staff currently can approve at staff level, which we're codifying in this rule, are non-internally illuminated painted wood or metal signs in a horizontal location above a storefront that is limited to a location that was historically used as a sign ban. It also allows for signage, vinyl signs in the windows, small neon signs behind the windows, and it does allow for, we do also, this rule allows for some external illumination. And years ago, we were writing permits for gooseneck fixtures to illuminate signs, and the commission has sort of moved away from that. And today, what we require is a concealed light source, exterior light source. So that is also built into the language of this rule. Then the bracket sign would be broadened to cover all districts, and this would be limited to storefronts, not to any building that happens to have a retail use in it. And the size of the bracket signs is limited by zoning. So in commercial or residential districts, the projection cannot be more than 12 inches, and in some cases 18 inches from the property line. So that's a lot smaller than what is allowed in the manufacturing districts, which is a 40-inch projection. So for the industrial districts, we would, as we now do, we would approve signs that extend up to 40 inches from the property line, which is 2 feet by 3 feet generally. And in the residential and commercial districts, that size would be limited by the relevant zoning. And finally, the third sort of key point about the signage rule is that it allows the staff to decide that there is a cumulative negative effect of the amount of signage that's being proposed. So if someone is proposing a horizontal sign above the storefront and a bracket sign and lettering in the window, the staff can say, well, even though each one of those follows the criteria, the cumulative amount of signage is too much, and therefore you need to go to a public hearing or reduce the amount of signage so that we can limit that. And that is currently built into the bracket sign rule and would apply for all signage.
Two more sections, Commissioners. Section 7 deals with expedited approvals, and again, we do right now. The current rule is for allowing work, interior work above the second floor, so that's the third floor and above, third story and above, to be handled in an expedited fashion, and we did quite a few of these. And we're checking that there's sort of a formal self-certification, though we do check each one anyway. When we get them in and out of here in about 24 hours, so it's an important thing. We are proposing to include cellar or basement work, but not excavation. So again, it tends to be some of the stuff that, right? It just doesn't meet the rules. If it's in the cellar, it's got to be, we've said it can't be fall into the rules. And now we would make it explicit that as long as there's not excavation involved, they can do any work in the cellar, any innovation they would need to do, and maybe get their excavation.
Electrical work.
Right, all that. Finally, Section 9 deals with a new section in Chapter 7 of the rules that deals for revocation of commission approvals. Right now, unlike the Department of Buildings, we have no standardized revocation process for a permit. It's issued. We've never been part of the rules, and we've done it on an ad hoc basis where the need has arisen because there's been a material misrepresentation or there's been other problems with the application. But we wanted to formalize that process. And so we looked at the Department of Buildings' 10-day revocation process as the model here. What we would do is we would send out a letter. The chair would send out a letter, or the representative of the chair, that would serve as notice that you have 10 days to provide. We believe that this permit should be revoked because of misrepresentation or it was issued in error a couple of times. So there have been occasions where staff has made a mistake and something was given a staff permit when it didn't meet all the requirements. We want to be able to revoke that permit. And so they would have 10 days to be service. The person, like the Department of Buildings, has 10 days to respond and explain why they believe that the permit should vote, and ultimately the chair would make the determination whether the permit should be revoked. Yes.
Is there an automatic stop work?
Yes.
On receipt of that? Okay.
Because it doesn't say receipt of them.
And then the decision by the chair would be reviewable by Article 78. Again, we don't, ESA is not a jurisdiction over our decisions, so it would be in Article 78. So those are the proposed rules that are being, that are the subject of the public hearing today. We'll take testimony. Again, any thoughts you all have, feel free to contact, Sarah or myself. And we'll be bringing these back. That point, I will be summarizing what the testimony has been. I will be giving staff's response and recommendations how to deal with issues raised in the public testimony at a future date. So, is that
Okay.
yeah.
Just a question.
Yeah, go, sure.
Okay. On section 9, and we can discuss this later, but in the case in which is covered, in which you're revoking a permit, the construction is ongoing at the moment when you revoke it, and perhaps the work needs to in some way be stabilized or completed or whatever for the structural stability of the situation, because, that's an unusual case, but that should be covered in some fashion.
Again, we will.
Michael, do you have another question or comment, or was it Pablo?
What's our timeline on this? Do you have a sense?
I think it certainly depends on the kinds of comments we get. So this in the past, usually something, it'll be a month or two before something may come back.
But within that time frame. And then after we have the testimony, which we'll start in a moment on item 1, then the second item of the amendments, they're also technically rules, but it's the fees that we'll deal separately with. But I'd like to get this part started, and I'll ask Tara Kelly to be the first to speak from Friends.